Is that good now? All right. Glad we got that figured out. If you were here last week, you will remember that Pastor Josh very kindly informed us all that I was the funny one. And so thank you to Josh. Meant a lot, but also created some pressure this morning. How am I supposed to live up to that? So I decided that I'm going to do the same thing as Josh. I'm going to pass on the responsibility of humor to someone else. So if you're looking for laughs this morning, Pastor George is your guy. Talk to him later. He will get you what you need. This morning we're going to talk about how our actions are important. Last week we were reminded of how our words hold power, how our words are important, and we're not hoping to forget that this week, but we are going to highlight the importance of our actions, and specifically the importance of helping out those around us who need help, and doing so without delay, doing so without putting it off for a later time that's maybe more convenient for us or that works slightly better. But if the need is there, doing what we can, what's in our ability to help meet those needs. So our proverb this morning, it's Proverbs 3, verse 28. It's from King Solomon, as most of our proverbs have been. And this is how it goes. It says, "If you can help your neighbor now, don't say, 'Come back tomorrow and then I'll help you.'" It's pretty straightforward. As far as I think, if you can help your neighbor now, don't say, "Come back tomorrow and then I'll help you." I don't think we need to go into a deep dive necessarily into the Greek to figure out exactly what Solomon is trying to say to us, what God is trying to say to us through this proverb. However, I did consult a few commentaries as I was doing some research, and honestly, they made it more confusing than I think it had to be. And so we're going to take the simple approach this morning. Our outline for the message this morning is going to be very straightforward, hopefully easy to follow along for all of us. The first half is going to be us talking about some common reasons that we might give, some common excuses for why we don't help our neighbor, some things that we maybe think to ourselves, some reasons that we maybe say to our neighbor who needs our help, but just some reasons that we most commonly give in order to avoid helping out our neighbors that need help. And then we're going to transition a little bit into the second half, which will be why it's important to actually live out the wisdom found in this proverb. I think both parts are important, as we do have an enemy, the devil, who is trying to convince us that we should not help. He does not like it when we help out our neighbor, and it's good to be aware of what those common temptations are, those common excuses that we can give, so that when that temptation comes, we're able to say, "Hey, I know what this is. I know that maybe this reason doesn't actually stand up as the greatest excuse of all time." And then it's important as well in the second half to know why it's important to live out this proverb, because that will help us actually do so. A couple of things before we jump into our first common reason of why we might say no to helping our neighbor. The first one is that when I say neighbor in the message this morning, I'm referring to more than just the people that are on our street. I'm referring to more than just the people in our close proximity, but I'm referring to everyone that we cross paths with. I think this is biblically accurate as well, as we see in the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan meets the injured guy on the road, and they have never met before, and yet Jesus says that the Good Samaritan was being a good neighbor to that man. So I think we can apply this to this proverb as well and say that if our neighbor comes to us for help, or we see our neighbor with help, we see our neighbor who needs help, that applies to more than just the people on our street. That's anybody that we cross paths with. And the second thing that I want to clear up before I go into the main part of the message is that it says, "If you can help your neighbor now, don't say 'come back tomorrow and then I'll help you.'" And I think that word "if" is important, because we're not able to, and I don't think it's our job to fix everything that's going on in the world. At some point, there's going to be a limit, and that's not the point of this message. The point is that we should help our neighbor when we see that they need help, but just something to be aware of, that we're not going to be able to solve every single thing that goes on. All right. The first thing, coming in at the number one spot for why we might say, no, neighbor, I can't help you right now. It's busyness. We might say we're too busy at the moment to help this person that needs our help. And again, this could be true. We could actually be too busy to help this person who needs our help right now. I think a lot of the time, however, the reason that we're too busy is not something that we should be prioritizing above helping our neighbor who needs help. So for the purpose of this point, we're going to say that we are busy with something that isn't as important as helping our neighbor. Maybe we're driving past them, we're on our way to something. Maybe it's a family gathering, we're grocery shopping, we're doing something, this or that, whatever it is. We say, sorry neighbor, I am too busy right now to help you. I've got my own thing going on. And when we do this, when we pass our neighbor by and we give this reason either in our heads as we pass them by, or we say it actually to this person who needs our help, what we're doing is we're putting ourselves as number one. We are saying that my time, my wants, my needs are more than yours. And this is not how God calls us to live. Mark 9, verse 35, Jesus gathers his disciples together, and he calls them to be servants, to put others before themselves. He says, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. Another common reason that I found, at least in my own life, for why I might say to someone who needs help, sorry, I can't help you right now, has to do with money. A lot of the time, we don't need money to help people. There's a pretty good argument to be made that the best help that we can give for someone is teaching them about Jesus, or if they're a believer, encouraging them in that, praying for them, and money doesn't have to be involved in that. But there are situations as well when helping someone out in their need that they have at the moment does come at a financial cost, and a lot of the time, me at least, and maybe for you as well, it's not always a sacrifice that I am super excited about making, whether it's just something in the near future that I'm going to have to give up, where I was going to spend this money on something for myself. Now I'm spending it on this person who needs my help. Maybe it's a future financial security or stability thing that we're concerned about, or for me the most, or for me at least, a lot of the time, the way that this temptation comes up is something along the lines of, maybe one day I'd like to buy a house, maybe even here in the Lower Mainland. And is that ever going to be a possibility if I give my money away now? It's probably pretty unlikely. But I don't know if this is the greatest excuse either of all time that we can use. Jesus calls us to store up for ourselves treasures in heaven. He does not call us to store up for ourselves treasures here on earth. And that's because our lives here on earth are not our permanent homes. We're not here for very long at all in the grand scheme of eternity. And this realization was made clear to me for a few reasons recently. One of them, in a more lighthearted way, is I was watching the Toronto Blue Jays game yesterday, or at least I was watching the start of it, celebrating the 1992 World Series championship team. So the Toronto Blue Jays from 30 years ago came onto the field. They were reliving some of the moments from 30 years ago when they won the World Series. And these guys, who 30 years ago were the World Series champions, were not looking quite so young anymore. I don't want to say they were old, because I said that yesterday and my dad got slightly offended. So but I'll stick with they were not as young as they once were. And it showed me that in 30 years, a lot can change. These guys went from being the absolute most prime of their life athletically to 30 years later not being the same at all. And it showed me that so much can change in that amount of time. Life moves quick, and does it really matter? In my life, if I give my money away now and I can't afford to buy a house here in the Lower Mainland, sure, money can be a great thing to advance God's kingdom. It can be a great tool for that, but I don't need an abundant amount of money to serve Jesus faithfully. Jesus praised the widow who gave away those 2 copper coins, all she had to live on. Jesus challenged the rich young ruler to sell everything that he owned, give the money to the poor, and follow Jesus. And so I don't think that thinking we need to hold on to our money for a future reason, for a future thing that might come up, is necessarily a reason to refuse to help someone here and now who needs our help. A couple of other quick reasons that might come up why we might say no to our neighbor, that we can't help them now. One is just procrastination or laziness. It's so easy to say, and then it's still so easy to say, I'll help you tomorrow. And that just keeps on happening until it's too late. The situation has passed, something has happened, and we've missed our chance to help this person. Or else we say to our neighbor, hey, come back tomorrow, and I'll help you then. All the while we are actually wanting someone else to do the helping. In between today and tomorrow, we think someone else is maybe in a better financial situation, they have more time on their hands, so we say, yeah, this person will do it, come back tomorrow, whereas we really don't want to help them that badly. Let's switch gears for the next few minutes and talk about why it's important to live out this proverb, why we should sacrificially give up our time, our money, our comfort in order to help those who are in need. The first reason for why it's important to do this is simply because God commands us to. It's not the only reason why we should do this, but even if it were to be the only reason, it's a good enough reason in itself. Simply, God calls me to do this. God, I trust you. I'm going to do what you call me to do. There are a lot of places in Scripture that, other than this proverb 3 verse 28 is definitely one of the verses that call us to live in this way, but there are lots more as well. The Good Samaritan parable that Jesus shares in Luke chapter 10 is an example. And I love this parable because, for a lot of reasons, but partly because the Good Samaritan doesn't just help his neighbor, but he actually helps his enemy. It's someone who hate each other in the parable, and we don't really know any other information beyond what is told to us, but I think it's probably fair to assume that he was not just traveling this road for no reason at all. He was probably going somewhere. He probably had a purpose. He had things to do, and yet he dropped those for the moment and said, your need right now is more important than what I need to do, and so I'm going to help you. I'm going to give up my full day to help whatever you need me to do. And then Jesus in chapter 10, verse 37, he calls us to go and do likewise. I have a few other verses here that I'd like to highlight for God calling us to live this kind of way. It says in Matthew 5, verse 44, but I say, this is Jesus speaking, but I say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Proverbs 5, verse 21 says, if your enemies are hungry, give them food to eat. If they are thirsty, give them water to drink. Matthew 22, verse 39 says, love your neighbor as yourself. James 1, verse 27, pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. Hebrews 13, verse 16, and don't forget to do good and to share with those in need. These are the sacrifices that please God. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 24, don't be concerned for your own good, but for the good of others. And Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4, it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So I'd encourage all of us to read some of those verses maybe in their full context that we get. It's hard to necessarily get the full picture from an isolated verse, but it's a lot easier to do that as we read the verses surrounding it in the context that they were written. But it does seem clear that God does in fact call Christians to love our neighbors, to help those who are in need, to put others above ourselves. And so that is a reason right there to obey. Another reason is that it actually leads to full life. We get full life from following God's commands, which is an incredible bonus. We exist as a church to help people experience full life as Jesus Christ intended. And the way that it happens is first by confessing our belief in Jesus, confessing our faith in him, and then the way to truly experience the full life after that as Jesus Christ intended is to follow the instructions that he has laid out for us. And it's so countercultural and it seems so backwards that giving up our time and giving up our money, giving up our comfort to serve others actually leads to more joy, more peace, more love for God and love for others, more thankfulness overflowing out of us. But this is the truth that the Bible teaches, and yet it's so easy in any given moment to convince ourselves that we need more, that Jesus is all right, but I need something more in my life to truly make me happy. And this just isn't true. If we look at examples of people in the Bible, Paul is one that comes to mind right away, of someone who is sold out for Jesus, and even though it's led him to some pretty rough situations, the joy in his life is evident. It's so clear that he has that full life that Jesus Christ intended it. And he says in Philippians 4, verse 12, he says, "I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want." And I love this verse. He'll talk about in the next verse that it's through Jesus that he has the strength to be content in whatever situation he finds himself in. But in this verse, he mentions how he's content whether he's well-fed or hungry, and he doesn't even mention the times that he's being whipped or beaten with rods or shipwrecked, or that he's currently writing the letter to the Philippians from a prison cell. And those things are true, and yet the book of Philippians overflows with Paul's joy because he has truly found full life in living completely for Jesus. I found this to be true in my own life as well. I'm the happiest. I feel like my life is the most fulfilled when I am serving others. The most recent example of this was at Ruth and Naomi's this past Tuesday. Just having that opportunity to serve people, to give them plates of food when they needed a meal, to pray with them, to talk about their relationship with Jesus if they have one, or what their faith journey is like. It was so exciting. It filled me with so much joy and peace and love for these people. And yet it shocks me sometimes how easy it is for me to forget that. Like the next day I can be like, yeah, that was fun, but don't really want to do that all the time. But the truth is that we get full life from doing things like that, from serving, from helping our neighbor, from following the commands that God has given us. For this message is definitely not the last point that could be made about why it's a good idea to live out the wisdom found in this proverb. But as I talk about this third point, the worship team can make their way forward. The third reason for why it's a good idea to love our neighbor, to put others above ourselves, is that we are displaying God's love to the world. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 20 says that we are ambassadors for Christ, that Christ has given us as Christians, as the church, some of the responsibility for showing the world who Jesus is, showing the world what the love of Jesus is like. And a lot of that comes from the things that we say, telling people about Jesus, who he is. But so much of that comes as well from our actions, from the things that we do. And if we live out of the same kind of sacrificial love, the same kind of humility and servant posture that Jesus had, we're displaying Christ well to the world. And if we pass by our neighbor and we say, I don't want to help you right now, even though I have the ability to, then the ramifications of that fall into how the world views Jesus. But if we deny ourselves, if we take up our cross and we say, even though helping you right now, serving you right now is going to cost me something, I'm happy to do it because I love you. I want to help you get through whatever you're going through right now. I want to ease this situation for you, and ultimately I want you to find Jesus. Then the world will see Christ in that way as well. So this whole message this morning was basically the make it practical section, so I don't really need to add anything too much more to it. And I don't think that we all live the exact same weeks or go through the exact same things, so I don't want to give any very specific way that we can apply this to our lives. Rather, just a generic way of, as we go this week, as we serve Jesus this week, look for those opportunities to help others, look for those opportunities to serve others when we can, and not let them pass by. It's possible that we truly might have a very good reason for why we can't help this person right now. But my challenge for all of us would be to take a look at what the reasons are that we commonly find ourselves giving for why we can't help our neighbor. And if those are truly good reasons or not, and have that conversation with God, figure out where we fall in those situations. And I'd encourage us all this morning to take this proverb truly to heart and to remember the importance of helping others in loving people without delay. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for this morning. Thank you for who you are, what you've done, and what you will continue to do. We're so thankful for your love for us and for your word, for the wisdom in the book of Proverbs. I pray that as we continue to ponder over this verse that we find and some of these other verses that talk about similar things, that we will think about the common reasons that we generally have for saying no to helping others out. I know a lot of us do help out an extremely large amount, and that is amazing. But it's still like a good idea to look at those times when we find ourselves wanting to do something else and just asking ourselves, is that a good reason to say no right now? And God, I pray that as we do that, we will look for those opportunities, seek out those opportunities to help others, and that you will give us the love for people, the love for you to obey what you have commanded us to do. God, I pray for all of us this morning and as we go out that your love would be with us and that you would fill us with your Holy Spirit. In your name, Jesus, amen.